This is Chapter 9, the Confederation and the Constitution. Some of the key terms that you need to know for this chapter, and some of the people to know. Looking at our nation's first government, it could be said that the nation's first government was the Second Continental Congress. It served from July 4th, 1776, with the signing of the Declaration of Independence through March 1st, 1781. Some of the powers that the Second Continental Congress had are similar to those powers that our government has today. State constitutions. This is an important slide to pay attention to because a lot of what comes into our Constitution originated in the state constitutions. And you can see that Massachusetts created a lasting example by calling a constitutional convention, and this is similar to calling the Constitutional Convention for writing the federal Constitution. So some of the things that are similar: popular sovereignty, limited government, civil rights and liberties, and the separation of powers. And a lot of state constitutions included legislatures or lawmakers, but then they also included weak executive and judicial branches. The Articles of Confederation are considered our first constitution. It was adopted by Congress in 1777. It was not ratified or approved by the states until 1781. The states agreed after the war that some of the land that had been gained would be ceded over to the central government. Some components of the Articles of Confederation: the 13 states were linked together by a loose agreement with Congress. Each state had one vote in Congress. If they wanted to pass a law dealing with all of the states, 9 of the 13 states had to agree upon it. In order to amend or change the Articles of Confederation, it required 100% agreement amongst the states. And the Articles of Confederation were deliberately made the central government weak because of that fear of just coming out of the war and fighting against a strong central power like the British monarchy. The colonists were afraid of setting up a strong executive branch or a central government because they felt they would end up fighting for rights again. A graphic organizer of the Articles of Confederation. Some components that make up the Articles and some that can be considered their weakness. Congress did not have the power to tax. States often refused to support the central government, and the states were printing their own money. They could make treaties with foreign countries. It didn't require the approval of Congress. And because of this, it was almost like separate little countries working together, but then they started to mistrust one another. And it wasn't like the United States is today because the states had more power and the central government was weak. When they drafted the Articles of Confederation, one of the things that they really failed to think about, and they did this with the Constitution as well, but is to grant equality for all of the citizens. So separation of church and state caused a de-anglicized church, and it reformed as the Episcopal Church. Several northern states abolished slavery, but did not force abolition in the new nation. And that was one area that they could have really made a difference for the future and freed the slaves at that point in time, but they never took those steps. And because of that, even in the North, the African Americans faced discrimination. And then the other group that did not get equality is women, who were not allowed to vote and were basically entrusted with the moral education of the youth. A quick look at how economics worked before the Revolution. You can read this. Basically, there's no currency, no money ever exchanged hands. It's more of a trading and bartering system. But post-revolution, American ships were banned from British harbors. You have inflation that increases and ruins a lot of businesses. Merchants could trade with foreign countries, but they needed cash to trade with Britain. And some war baby American industries struggled to get off the ground, and those were businesses that were started during the Revolutionary War. Another issue during the Articles of Confederation, but this would be considered a strength of them, is how they dealt with the land that was acquired in the Northwest Territory. One of the ways was the Land Ordinance of 1785, which allowed the Northwest to be sold in order to help pay the national debt. And then the Northwest Ordinance of 1787 basically set up how territories could apply for statehood. And if you look at this map, this is the area considered the Northwest Territory. One event that really highlights the weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation is Shays Rebellion. It takes place in Massachusetts in 1786. Captain Daniel Shays led a successful assault on a courthouse in Springfield. He was leading backcountry farmers who were losing their farms through mortgage foreclosures. Shays was demanding more paper money, lighter taxes, and no property takeovers. And the armed conflict took place at the arsenal in Springfield, and the rebellion was quickly put down. Some of the effects of Shays Rebellion: Daniel Shays escaped to Vermont. The Merchant Party was voted out of the Massachusetts legislature, and the new legislature slashed taxes. John Hancock became governor of Massachusetts, and he pardoned Shays and his men. And Shays Rebellion exposed the need of a strong central government. And so this is what basically leads to the Constitutional Convention and the rewriting of our Constitution. Problems with the Confederation: the national government did not regulate interstate commerce. They could not levy taxes, they could not raise an army, and they could not pay their debt. So they had to have a convention in order to revise the Articles of Confederation. But if they wanted to change it, remember that 13 out of 13 of the states had to agree upon it. "55 men representing all of the states except for Rhode Island attended the convention in Philadelphia from May to September of 1787. Large states proposed the Virginia Plan, which called for a two-house lawmaking body or a bicameral legislation, and they thought that that two-house legislature should be based on the population of the state. And then the southern and the smaller states proposed a different plan known as the New Jersey Plan, where all of the states had equal representation regardless of their population. So in order to overcome these two plans and this divide at the convention, a compromise had to be reached. It was known as the Great Compromise. And this is where the proposed plan was to have two houses, so a bicameral legislation, one house based on population and one based on equality, regardless of the population of the states. Another issue that divided the convention was slavery. A lot of the southern states' population was comprised of slaves, and they wanted the slaves to be counted in as part of the population of the state in order to be able to send more representatives to government. And some didn't agree with that. So in order to overcome this compromise, they proposed the 3/5, where the lower house would count each slave of a state as 3/5 of a person to represent the population of those states. It passed on July 6, 1787. 38 out of the 55 delegates approved the 3/5 compromise. Another issue at the Constitutional Convention and the division that was evident was between the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. Looking first at the Federalists, they were the delegates at Philadelphia. They didn't amend the Articles of Confederation. They created a new government. Proponents of the new Constitution were called Federalists, and they included Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, who is considered the father of the Constitution, and John Jay. And in order to gain support for that, they wrote a series of papers known as the Federalist Papers. And the Anti-Federalists were critics and opponents of the Constitution. They believed that the Constitution betrayed the revolutionary ideas by establishing a strong central government. They wanted a weaker central government, stronger state governments. And they also noted that the Constitution had no Bill of Rights. They felt that that needed to be revised in order to protect individuals. The states during ratification of the Constitution and how they fell into Federalist and Anti-Federalist populations. So ratification of the new Constitution. Delaware, Pennsylvania, and New Jersey ratified the Constitution immediately. Virginia ratified after a close vote, and New Hampshire became the 9th state. The new government would start on March 4th, 1789.